The COBIT 5 Foundation Certificate. Module 3, COBIT 5 Enablers. Lesson 2, Processes. Welcome to Module 3, Lesson 2, where you'll learn about the COBIT 5 Processes Enabler. In this lesson, we'll study a number of topics including the process goal categories and activities in the process lifecycle. The COBIT definition of a process is a collection of practices influenced by the enterprise's policies and procedures that takes inputs from a number of sources, including other processes, manipulates the inputs and produces outputs, for example, products, services. In Lesson 6 of Module 2, you learned about the COBIT 5 reference model and were introduced to the 37 COBIT processes. They are shown in this figure. Remember that the processes are grouped into one governance domain and 4 management domains. The governance domain, Evaluate, Direct and Monitor, or EDM, contains 5 processes. The Align, Plan and Organize domain contains 13 processes. The Build, Acquire and Implement domain has 10 processes. The Deliver, Service and Support domain has 6 processes. And the Monitor, Evaluate and Assess domain has 3 processes. In the exam, you will need to be familiar with this model. This course is concerned only with the generic features of the processes enabler, not with the details of each process. But we will take a closer look at one process just to give you a better understanding of the guidance that COBIT has to offer. The diagram on your screen shows the enabler model applied to processes. COBIT offers specific guidance for the lifecycle and good practices dimensions. In the rest of this lesson, we'll examine each aspect of the model in turn and see how it applies to processes. At each stage, we'll also see how each aspect is dealt with in Management Process BAI 06, Manage Changes. Let's start by taking a look at how COBIT documents each process. The process guidance is structured in 7 sections. The first 4 sections are Process Identification, Process Description, Process Purpose, and IT-related goals and metrics. The other 3 sections of the process documentation are Process Goals and Metrics, RACI Chart, and Practices. Now let's examine each of these sections in detail, starting with the process identification. Each process is given a unique identifier, constructed from the domain prefix and a process number and a short description. The domain name is also recorded, along with whether it is a governance or management domain. For example, Process Identifier, BAI 06 Manage Changes, Area, Management, Domain, Build, Acquire, and Implement. The next section of the process documentation is a description of the process. For example, the description of Process BAI 06 Manage Changes is Manage all changes in a controlled manner, including standard changes and emergency maintenance relating to business processes, applications, and infrastructure. This includes change standards and procedures, impact assessment, prioritization and authorization, emergency changes, tracking, reporting, closure, and documentation. You can see that this not only gives a high-level description of what the process does, but it also states its scope. After the process description comes a statement of the purpose of the process. This is a high-level description of what the process should achieve. The purpose of Process BAI 06 is enable fast and reliable delivery of change to the business and mitigation of the risk of negatively impacting the stability or integrity of the changed environment. The next section of the process description lists the IT-related goals supported by the process and gives some example generic metrics. These goals are taken from the 17 IT-related goals listed in Figure 6 of the COBIT 5 framework document. You'll remember that they form a level in the goals cascade mechanism that we covered in Lesson 2 of Module 2. You may find it useful to review that lesson. The IT-related goals relate to the stakeholder needs, and the associated metrics answer the question, are stakeholders' needs addressed? Process BAI-06 provides primary support for 3 IT-related goals. We'll examine each of them over the next 3 screens. The first IT-related goal of the Manage Changes process is 04. Manage IT-related business risk. 4 example metrics are given for this goal. 2 of them are % of critical business processes, IT services, and IT-enabled business programs covered by risk assessment. Number of significant IT-related incidents that were not identified in risk assessment. The next IT-related goal of Process BAI-06 is 07. Delivery of IT services in line with business requirements. 3 example metrics are given. Number of business disruptions due to IT service incidents. % of business stakeholders satisfied that IT service delivery meets agreed-on service levels. % of users satisfied with the quality of IT service delivery. The third and final IT-related goal of the process is 10. Security of information, processing infrastructure, and applications. 4 example metrics are documented. 2 of them are number of security incidents causing financial loss, business disruption, or public embarrassment. Number of IT services with outstanding security requirements. Okay, we've covered the IT-related goals of processes. Now we'll look at process goals and metrics. The process goals relate to the goals enabler dimension. You'll remember that there are 3 categories of process goals. Intrinsic goals. Does the process have intrinsic quality? Is it accurate and in line with good practice? Is it compliant with internal and external rules? Contextual goals. Is the process authorized and adapted to the enterprise's specific situation? Is the process relevant, understandable, easy to apply? Accessibility and security goals. The process remains confidential when required and is known and accessible to those who need it. The process goals defined for Process BAI-06 are authorized changes are made in a timely manner and with minimal errors. Impact assessments reveal the effect of the change on all affected components. All emergency changes are reviewed and authorized after the change. Key stakeholders are kept informed of all aspects of the change. Okay, let's have a change of pace by doing an exercise. You should aim to spend 20 minutes on this exercise, and don't forget to check out your study guide for a suggested solution. What metrics might you use to judge how well the goals of Process BAI-06 Manage Changes are being met? You can go back to the last screen for a list of the goals. You've now learned about both IT-related goals and process goals, and their metrics. The next section of the process description is the process RACI chart. This relates to the stakeholders enabler dimension. You learned about stakeholders in an earlier lesson. You'll remember that they can be external or internal. External stakeholders include customers, suppliers, and regulators. Internal stakeholders include governors, executives, and managers. A RACI chart provides a simple way of defining and identifying who does what in relation to a process and its activities. Its name is taken from the 4 key responsibilities that are identified. Responsible. Who is doing the work? At least one role must be responsible, but there could be more than one. Accountable. Where does the buck stop? This role is answerable for the successful execution of the work. It assigns responsibility, provides direction and resources, and so on. Only one role can be accountable. Consulted. Who provides input in the form of advice, information, or requirements? There is usually a dialogue with this role. Informed. This role is informed of progress, decisions, results, and so on. The communication is just one way. The diagram on your screen shows the RACI chart provided for process BAI-06 Manage Changes. The chart shows the responsibilities of a range of stakeholders in relation to the 4 management practices defined for this process. We'll be looking at these practices later in the lesson. You'll notice that the diagram uses different shading to distinguish between business and IT stakeholders. This is, of course, an example. The roles identified may not exist in your organization, or they might have different names. Also, this chart only includes internal stakeholders. Yours might need to include external ones. For example, the change management process of a commercial IT service provider would likely have its customers as stakeholders. You don't need to memorize this diagram for the exam, but you will deepen your understanding of COBIT if you take a few minutes to study it. Okay, you've learned about the stakeholder enabler dimension and the RACI chart. Now we'll move on to the final section of the COBIT process description. The final section is Process Practices, Inputs, Outputs, and Activities. This relates to the Good Practices enabler dimension. The diagram on the screen shows how this is applied to the specifics of the processes. It lists process practices, activities, detailed activities, and work products. By work products, we mean inputs and outputs. Let's begin by clarifying what COBIT means by practices, activities, and detailed activities. These describe, with an increasing level of detail and granularity, what must be done in order to achieve the process goals, and therefore also the IT-related goals. Process practices are referred to as either governance practices or management practices, depending on the domain of the process. For simplicity, we'll refer simply to practices. Remember, though, that the exam would probably use the full name. Process practices give a high-level statement of what a process must do if it is to serve its purpose and deliver the required value. Considered as a whole, across all processes, they define what must be done to govern and manage an enterprise. Of course, an enterprise is free to choose which practices are appropriate to its circumstances. Implementation of these practices is not mandatory, but dispensing with a practice should be a positive choice made in full knowledge of the accompanying risks. The key characteristics of a practice are: they define what must be done whilst optimizing risk and resources. They align with accepted standards and good practices. An enterprise is free to draw upon other frameworks when designing an implementation. They are generic and therefore must be tailored to meet the particular needs and circumstances of an enterprise. Another way of looking at this is that they are not prescriptive when it comes to implementation, so that any type and size of organization should be able to use them. And they include required business and IT involvement. COBIT defines several practices for each process. 4 practices are defined for process BAI-06 Manage Changes. They are BAI-06.01 Evaluate, Prioritize, and Authorize Change Requests. BAI-06.02 Manage Emergency Changes. BAI-06.03 Track and Report Change Status. And BAI-06.04 Close and document the changes. Notice the naming convention. Each practice is identified by adding a decimal suffix to the process identifier. COBIT defines 4 attributes for each practice: a description of the practice, inputs required, outputs produced, and activities needed to support the practice. Let's examine these practice attributes in more detail and use the practice BAI-06.01 Evaluate, Prioritize, and Authorize Change Requests as an example. The definition of this practice is: evaluate all requests for change to determine the impact on business processes and IT services, and to assess whether change will adversely affect the operational environment and introduce unacceptable risk. Ensure that changes are logged, prioritized, categorized, assessed, authorized, planned, and scheduled. You will have noticed that the practice description is at quite a high level. It wouldn't take you far if you were planning an implementation. For example, it doesn't really help you to decide how to prioritize changes. That is the purpose of the more detailed guidance provided by the practice activities. COBIT defines practice activities as guidance to achieve management practices for successful governance and management of enterprise IT. Like the practices, the activities are based on accepted standards and good practice, and should be tailored to fit the needs and circumstances of the enterprise. Several activities are described for each practice. In the case of Practice BAI 06.01, 7 activities are described. For example, Activity 3 is prioritize all requested changes based on the business and technical requirements, resources required, and the legal, regulatory, and contractual reasons for the requested change. This provides much clearer guidance because it specifies the criteria that should be used to prioritize a change. Activities are action-oriented. They provide a clear steer as to what must be done. As such, they provide a basis for assigning specific roles and responsibilities. Okay, we've covered practices and activities. Now let's turn to detailed activities. These are at the most detailed and granular level. This level of guidance is outside the scope of COBIT 5, and so the process documentation does not include it. However, it does document other sources of guidance. These include other products in the COBIT 5 family, recognized standards and frameworks, and books. The process definition includes a section labeled Related Guidance. The related guidance for BAI 06 is ISO IEC 20000, 9.2 Change Management, and ITIL, Service Transition, 4.2 Change Management. Okay, you've learned about practices, activities, and detailed activities. Now we'll look at inputs and outputs, or work products as COBIT calls them. These work products support decision-making, provide an audit trail, and provide a record of activity. Inputs and outputs are defined at the practice level. Inputs often come from other processes, and outputs often go to other processes. The work products for Practice BAI 06.01, Evaluate, Prioritize, and Authorize Change Requests, is shown on your screen. You can see that the output Impact Assessments is used within the practice itself. Okay, that completes our examination of the Good Practices Enabler dimension. The last dimension we need to look at is the life cycle dimension. Every process has a life cycle. It must be planned, designed, and brought into operational use. Operational processes must be monitored and evaluated, and if necessary, improved or even retired. The COBIT 5 process assessment model can help you to manage this life cycle. You'll learn about it in Module 5. Okay, we've studied the process enabler dimensions. Now we'll move on to performance management. The diagram on your screen illustrates the 4 aspects of process performance that need to be managed. These can be expressed as 4 questions. Are stakeholder needs addressed? The IT-related goals supported by the process will suggest some metrics. Are enabler goals achieved? The process descriptions describe process goals and suggest metrics. Is the enabler lifecycle managed? Are good practices applied? The first 2 questions relate to actual performance and are therefore backward-looking. They are known as lag indicators. The second 2 questions deal with what we might call the quality of the process. These are known as lead indicators. The idea being that a good quality process will deliver good performance in the future. The last topic in this lesson is the relationship of the process enabler with other enablers. Let's take this as an exercise. Aim to spend 20 minutes on this exercise, and don't forget to check out your study guide for our ideas. What links exist between processes and the other types of enabler? What links exist between processes and the other types of enabler? Okay, that completes this lesson on the process enabler. You've learned about a number of things, including the process enabler dimensions and the structure and content of process definitions. Before we complete this lesson, here's a quick quiz to test what you've learned. At the end of the quiz, you'll receive your result and can try the questions again if you would like to. The next lesson is Module 3, Lesson 3, Organizational Structures.